alarm switch is on. Here comes the throttle. Circuit breaker's in. We have separation. Roger. Inboard and outboards are on. We're coming forward with the side stick. All looks good. Roger. I've got a blowout. Damper 3. Pitch your pitch to 0. Pitch is out. I can't hold altitude. Correction. Alpha hold is off. Trip select is emergency. Flight comm. I can't hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. Better, stronger, faster.
Today is Tuesday, May the 14th, 2013. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Heath Mulligan.
Hey, friends. I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Technology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. This is finally episode 202.
202.5.
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
0.5.
202.5.
So explain to our viewers, listeners, what happened last week.
Well, as we've established, Apple doesn't sell a computer powerful enough to run this show, but the software that we use is great. So I had to build my own. It's a Hackintosh, and I don't know what happened, but something happened, and the sound card on the computer went out. It was a software thing. And I tried reinstalling drivers, did everything I couldn't fix it, had to rebuild the entire system from the ground up software-wise, so that meant wiping everything out, putting it all back. It was an intense week of work, but as they said in the $6 Million Man, we can rebuild it. We have the technology.
Well, good job. People just don't know the work that Matthew puts into this, and we appreciate him. And there was nothing he could do about it. I mean, he just had to reprogram and rebuild, and so we're back. So Heath, Matthew, and I wanted to give a big shout-out and thanks to Celebrate Community Church.
Yes.
We
look
had
at
Keith
that.
Loy on as our guest a couple weeks ago.
So
and
I'm just excited what Dr. Bence is going to send us
I-
after today. We get a big thing of candy bars, I tell you.
Signed copies of all his commentaries.
All right, I'm going to use that as a segue to introduce our guest for the day. Our guest is Dr. Clarence Bence. Most of his friends call him Bud. He loves church history and coffee. From 1992 to 2005, he was professor of church history at Indiana Wesleyan University. After serving 3 years as the vice president and academic dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at IWU, Dr. Bence returned to his first love, classroom teaching. He retired from full-time teaching in 2011, but continues teaching part-time as church historian in residence at Wesley Seminary at Indiana Wesleyan University. Dr. Bence, welcome to the show.
Well, good afternoon. This ought to be quite an interesting few minutes together with you guys.
Looking forward to it.
Listen, we knew, you being the tech guy that you are, that you were the person we needed to have on the show.
And I can only imagine what I'm going to think to send you guys. I think presentable for the next show.
We will wait in eager anticipation.
I could send you a signed copy of my dissertation, but that would put you to sleep. And I'd awake for a while.
Well, do that to us if you want to punish us, okay? All right, let's jump into the interview. At the outset, we want to take advantage of your knowledge in the area of church history. Recently, I had a conversation with a Wesleyan pastor who had virtually no knowledge about the camp meeting movement, which was such a big part of the holiness movement at large, but the Wesleyan Church and its history specifically. Just talk about its historical significance and also your own personal experience and interaction with camp meeting growing up.
Oh, my goodness. My dad was camp meeting chairman back up in New York. Interesting little town called Chambers. I've never figured out what went on in that town. But apparently they had some kind of rooms available for somebody. And but it was called Chambers, New York, Chambers Camp. I was a boy that played in the creek when I was young, counselor, ended up being the youth camp pastor or youth camp president. It's my life, Scott. I'm sorry, Tony. It's my life that I have come to know so well. And then I remember the time that one of the evangelists at camp, Dr. Failing, became ill, and they yanked me off the front pew and said, "You can preach." And it was my first preaching at a camp. Have done camp meeting speaking since then. I love it. Yeah. It's a great part of my life.
Talk about that. I mean, let's get back to the significance of camp meeting and the holiness movement and the role that it played in the holiness movement's history.
We didn't invent the camp meetings. The camp meetings were around in 1800, actually begun by Presbyterians of all things in Kentucky. And that's another story maybe for another time. But camp meetings became a part of American Christianity just about 1800, and people gathered for wonderful opportunities of preaching. They blended in, Tony, with Charles Finney, a man, again, from New York State, where I'm from, great evangelist, who suggested that if you wanted to have a revival in your community and your church, you had to have special services. He called them protracted meetings, which meant that you started on a given date and you quit when the Spirit left, and that could be however long you wanted. But Finney, in his great book, The Lectures on Revival, said you have to have these special events. God doesn't send a revival unless you put something into it. So you take Finney's revivalism, and it just blends perfectly with camp meetings. Here is a time during the year where people gather together, and what better place to promote the doctrine of holiness than you would at these special summer camps.
Yeah. Well, and the first 10 churches that got planted in 1893 in our district were all result of camp meetings where people came together and said, "Hey, we like this message of holiness. Let's start a church together."
So you get that kind of excitement. It's Wesley would have been uncomfortable with camp meetings, I think. He was too much of an Anglican minister, but he would certainly have loved the passion and intensity that was behind it. Probably not quite keen on the method, but how much different. It's really not that far from Wesley standing on coal piles over in England and preaching in the field, and having somebody stand in a building that looks like a barn and preaching the message of salvation and holiness all across the United States.
Well, can you take some time and talk about how holiness was presented in these camp meetings and how it stacked up against the holiness that Wesley talked about?
Wow, Heath, you just threw me a softball, and I'm going to drive this one not only out of the podcast. Wesley, let's talk about what's common first, and then I'll talk about the difference. Wesley had a passionate belief that people who were Christians ought to live a transformed life. He picked that up out of his Anglican tradition someplace. Roman Catholicism says the goal of the Christian life is to be a saint. Mother Teresa, Francis, St. Augustine, you name them. You want to be a saint. They added a lot of human endeavor into that. So when the reformers came along, Martin Luther there, that's behind Tony's head, and John Calvin. I don't see Calvin there.
He's there.
Oh, he's there.
Right there.
Okay. I'm pointing at him.
Both of them didn't like the idea that somehow what we did contributed to our salvation. And so they, in a sense, lopped off half of Catholicism. One of the great books on John Wesley says John Wesley took the goal of the Roman Catholics, sainthood, and wedded it, merged it in with the Protestant view of salvation by faith. And when you put those two together, you get not only does God forgive us, but God also wants to transform us. Not by what we do, but by his work. Luther didn't like that. That sounded like going back the wrong way. So Luther says, I was a sinner, I am a sinner, I will always be a sinner, but the difference is I'm a believing sinner. And therefore the focus is more on confessing my sin and experiencing God's constant forgiveness. Calvin went more towards sanctification, but Calvin says it isn't what we do. It isn't what we do that saves us. Salvation is all of what God does. So if we live good lives, which we ought to, the Bible tells us that, we can't say that's part of salvation. Wesley says, no, salvation is first of all justification. God forgives us. But 1 John 1:9 says that he also cleanses us from all unrighteousness. Mm-hmm. So to get started on the question after 10 minutes, Wesley believes that there is a transforming work that God does. We help him, for sure, but it is a work that God does. And that's camp meeting. That is camp meeting. God wants to make you a changed person. And because God wants to make you a changed person, Wesley says, you ought to be pretty serious about this. If you read Wesley's sermons, he's pretty intense. Mm-hmm. He says, you must receive this by faith. You must receive it now. And boy, once you stick in that word now, you've got the hook, the real, the whole issue that comes up. Because what Wesley was saying, at least as I understand it, was you need to start this process. You need every day of your life to be moving forward. That's why he went around and visited all of the Methodists that were in these societies and asked them, are you moving forward in your Christian life? Yeah. That's why he said to preachers, if you haven't been entirely sanctified, if you haven't been made perfect in love, are you earnestly seeking? So Wesley is on a chase, a pursuit. When it got to America with revivalism, I mean, here's Finney, who's getting people, quote, saved, forgiven, justified, whatever word, converted may be the better word. Finney says you can come to the altar, you can get saved. Yeah. Well, now you got camp meetings, and you don't want to tell people you can get started on this process today. If you can walk into a Finney revival and be unsaved and walk out a born-again Christian, why can't you come to camp meeting and come in as a carnal or a fleshly or an unsanctified believer and ask for it by faith and walk out sanctified? At least that's what I grew up with, Heath.
Right. Yeah. Well,
and how many times I made that walk to the altar at a camp meeting to say, God, fix it and fix it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, was Finney the one who after one of his meetings, someone said, well, how many converts did you have? He said, I don't know. Ask me in 6 months. Because he kind of recognized that, you can come to the altar now, but you see.
That sounds like Finney. Yeah. Because for Finney, it's conversion. It's a transformed life. Yeah. But he didn't have the concept that Finney was a Presbyterian, and he saw that, much like Wesley did, as a process of growing in virtue, in faith, hope, and love. We haven't mentioned her name yet, but a wonderful woman by the name of Phoebe Palmer.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Just simply said, why would it, if God wants to save me, or if God wants to cleanse me of sin, and I want to be cleansed of sin, those are the only two ingredients you need. God wants it, I want it. Let's have it happen right now.
You know, you and I have had a few emails exchanged over the last few days here, and one of the things I put in the email is a conversation. I just alluded to a conversation that Dr. Joe Donjel and I had, and I know that you know Joe, and he and I are kind of kindred spirits on this, and believe that within the holiness movement, and I come up through the Nazarenes till I was 18, and then the Wesleyan, that we're more heirs of Phoebe Palmer than we are heirs of Wesley. And some, I've read, I mean, this may be up for debate, so I just want your opinion on it. You know, some say that the Wesley that we get from Phoebe Palmer is through Fletcher. And so, you know, it's Wesley, it's Fletcher, then it's Phoebe Palmer, her altar, you know, this claim it now. And so what I mean, in that whole morass there, what do you think?
You can make the argument that Wesley's moving towards where Fletcher and Palmer will end up. In about 1763, when somebody asked him, how long does it take to be made perfect in love? He said, many years. Somebody else asked him, when do you receive it? He says, usually shortly before you die, but it could be earlier. He didn't want to put a time frame on God. But by the end of his life, he was observing that many, many people were experiencing this seemingly quickly. And so he's shifting. But there is a place where my way of phrasing it, Tony, is that the Wesleyans have out-Wesleyed Wesley. We tried to speed the train up. We're a fast food society.
Yeah.
Wow. Why can't we microwave this rather than cooking it in the oven.
Yeah. Well, do you think, I mean, you talk about Wesley and his, at different times in his life, he had a different answer to that. Is part of that because Wesley so valued experience that he was willing to change his mind about that because he would see in some person who testified to having all the assurance of sanctification and the fullness of perfect love?
Yeah, and you've hit the magic word that just drops down. Groucho Marx would have a little bird coming down, and I'd make $50 for what you just did. You talked about experience. Wesley liked to use the word experimental. He was really a scientist before his time. He wrote a medical textbook. You probably know that.
Yeah.
But he was willing to say, I've observed this. Now we take experience and we make it psychological. It's a feeling kind of thing. Wesley was not so much into feeling as he was saying, I've just seen 500 people who have experienced this. Therefore, that's what experience means to Wesley. It's more, I've tested it in practical situations. I think part of what not even so much Phoebe Palmer, is the camp meetings, Tony, turn that into experience, meaning you got to have a crisis.
Yes.
There's got to be some kind of lightning bolt from heaven, as Martin Wells Knapp described it.
Yeah. By the way, on Wesley's medical book, I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of the remedies he has in there is if you rub onion on the top of a bald head, it'll grow hair.
And you've been putting that into practice for how many years now, Tony?
I'm working on it.
I just discovered what I'm going to send you guys this week.
Hey, Bud, one of the questions in the chat room about, what we've just been talking about is, to your knowledge, did Wesley ever claim personally to be entirely sanctified? Maybe he didn't use that terminology, but did he ever say, hey, I have experienced this?
I love his answer, Heath. He was asked once, or it was claimed in the London Times, Wesley says he is entirely sanctified. Wesley fired back a letter to the editor and said, I have never claimed to be entirely sanctified. I proclaim that it is possible, but I will not claim it for myself because, like Herod, you want to find the baby so you can kill it. Isn't that a great line? That when somebody starts to testify of it, the reason we want to do it is so we can go after that person. So when Bud Bence says he's entirely sanctified, somebody will say, but I saw you coming out of Kroger's supermarket on Sunday or something like that. And I get nailed. Wesley, everyone believes that Wesley himself, because he believed this was a process of growing virtue, Wesley did attain this. And I think he attained it in his life, at least as much as other people do. I just don't think he wanted to announce it, because you set yourself up for a target. You get put a big target on yourself when you say, I've got it.
Well, let me ask you, my anecdotal experience. I am the DBMD chair. That means I'm in charge of students on our district who are studying for ordination. And the whole issue of sanctification, it's central to who we are as Wesleyans. But what I have found, again, anecdotal, is that over the years, there's been so much confusion around the doctrine in terms of instantaneous, progressive, I can get it, I can't get it, that from a preaching point of view, it's becoming less and less and less of an emphasis, and almost this homogenization of evangelicalism, where we're just kind of, leaving that distinctive behind. I'm curious about your reaction to that and your own anecdotal experience.
Well, I totally agree. I think that there's so much controversy out there, Tony, that the best thing is you avoid it altogether. I do think that there are a lot of pastors who are talking about moving on in the Christian life, talking about a deeper Christian life. So it isn't that the doctrine is gone. It in some ways, to agree with Dr. Donjo, we're coming back to the idea of Wesley saying, this is something you pursue.
Right.
The struggle is to talk about attaining it. And in my own experience, I think there's strong parallels between spiritual healing, this cleansing of the inner person, and physical healing. I believe in instantaneous healing. I have seen people who have, in a matter of moments, or at least a matter of a day or two, experienced total transformation of their physical bodies. I have seen other people where it is a gradual process. And in one of his sermons, it's called Satan's Devices. We'd call it today Satan's Tricks, Satan's Deceits. Wesley says, let's not put a time limit on when God will do this or how. The people who say, if you don't get it tonight, it's because there's something wrong with you, I don't respond to them anymore. That puts such pressure.
Yeah.
On the other hand, people who fall into a more reformed tradition of saying that here's an area of your life that you can bracket out and say, God can never fix this. I've got a bad temper.
Yeah.
God can never fix this. I struggle with impure thoughts. God can never fix this. Whatever it is, I don't think that's biblical either.
Yeah. I'm curious. I heard Dr. Earl Wilson some years ago, it was 15 to 20 years ago at a conference. He actually suggested that we just have to change our language. And so in the address that he gave, he talked about Christ-likeness. He said what we're talking about is the mind of Christ being formed in the image of Christ. And he actually proposed that we simply give up on the language because the semantics have become so bogged down. I'm curious how you react to that.
I don't want to go that far. I think that the word that we need to change is perfection. If Wesley had only said, I want to talk about Christian perfecting, an ing, rather than perfection sounds like I've got it, it's done, it's over. In my life, I think I'm trying on maybe not a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis, to think about what it means to be Christian perfecting.
Okay.
And leave to God to decide when Bud's gone far enough that he can. My opinion is that with me, God will take a whole lifetime, and maybe a little longer. There may be some, I don't know. I don't believe in purgatory, but I'm trying to figure out. There's some things that God will probably have to work on me after I'm through.
We had a private conversation in studio. We think it's going to be a lifetime for you as well.
Well, speaking of purgatory, you've been teaching ministry students for a few decades now. And as you've done that, I mean, what are some observations that you have as you've interacted with these different generations?
Wow, and I'm looking at three of you sitting there. What am I supposed to say? That is a great question, Keith. I think the thing that I would want to say is that the generation that I'm working with now, and I'm still teaching, is probably more attuned to spirituality than I was when I was in college, or those students that I taught at the very beginning. Spirituality is a big thing for them. But without getting into all the postmodern jargon, I think intensity more than depth has become the curse of the modern age. Spirituality is defined in terms of the intensity of the experience, not the depth of meaning. So that while we weren't nearly as intense in our worship, even in our passion to go out into the community, I think in the 1960s, 70s, the beginning of the...
We lost you. All right, here. I'm just going to try to hang up and call him back.
Yeah. We have a thought that one of your students who didn't like that too much may have come in and like cut some.
Someone postmodern just took control, right? It was a very intense moment.
Yes, it was. Not very meaningful, but it was sure intense.
So pick it up. Yeah, it's 60s and 70s.
Meaningful in terms of where we go. The other issue that had, as I look back, camp meetings produced a lot of guilt. Part of the whole idea of it was true of Finney's revivals too. People actually came to Finney's revivals expecting to be made to feel guilty, expecting that there would be an opportunity for them to come to the altar and kind of have a catharsis. I went to camp meetings with the expectation that there would be at least one or two sermons that would hit me hard and would to shape my life. That scarred me in some ways spiritually. I'll be very honest to say, after a while, you either become numb to the guilt, or you become oversensitized to it. My good friend Keith Drury says, Bud, you are one of the most guilt-ridden people I've ever read in my life. Stop apologizing all the time. And I say, Keith, it's a part of what I grew up with. If I played ball on Sunday, if I looked cross-eyed at person of the opposite, there was guilt all over the place in my life. I don't sense guilt in people today, almost to a fault. I wonder if the pendulum has swung so far that these students that I work with can be very intense in their spirituality, but not struggle as much with the idea of sanctification, that God really does want to transform my life, my behavior, even my personality, so that is that, Heath, can you pick up on that at all? Is that sound anywhere near reasonable, that less guilt, more intensity, more spirituality?
I think that the guilt we have now is very unhealthy. Like the guilt, like we don't have. I think you have to have guilt to propel you forward, but I think my generation, our guilt weighs us down, and we never get away from it. And so, like I just think that's just how I feel personally. You know, the people that I'm around is they feel it's like we don't trust that God's forgiven us of stuff that happened a decade ago, but what we did today, we don't feel guilty enough for it. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, I'm going to have to think about that, but you're right. It's the instantaneous guilt. I can do something yesterday and not feel that bad about it, but it accumulates. It's things that happened in my childhood. My parents got divorced.
Right.
There was some kind of physical or even sexual abuse in my life, and that doesn't go away. So maybe it's just a transferring of how the guilt operates in one generation and it operates in another.
And I think, you know, as Protestants, you know, we don't believe in, you know, going into the confessional with the priest, but I think as Protestants, what we've replaced is our form of confessional is just showing up in a pew on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Well, I did that, so I'm absolved for this week, and then I can move on. I mean, we don't say that, but that's how people live, and that's how people think. And so I'm struck by, you know, godly sorrow leads to repentance, and worldly sorrow brings death. And that, trying to hit my people with that is like, you should feel guilty. Like, I mean, used to be, there were things that people would be, there's no shame in our society. I'm going off on a tangent and getting on but there's no shame. There's absolutely no shame in our society for anything anymore. And I think the church has to walk this fine line of, it's not our job to shame people, but if you call sin, you're judgmental, and, you know, the IRS, you know, comes after you and all kind of stuff. So
yeah, right.
Well, a couple things here. I thought Facebook was the confessional, so I've got that all wrong.
Right.
I would say this, anecdotal, just my experience, Bud, and I'm curious what you think, that I see, now I'm talking about the generation under me. So I'll be 50 on my next birthday, so the generations behind me, I find sorrow. So I see, you know, there's quick apologies, but my observation is that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a change in behavior and that it won't happen again. Mm-hmm. And when it happens again, I'll just say I'm sorry, and I'm sorry is like the magic pixie dust, and I've sprinkled it, and so now I've said sorry. You can never bring that back again. And if I do it again and you try to bring it back from the last time, my response to you is, well, listen, I apologized for that then, and I'm apologizing for it now.
Yeah. Oh.
Is that, I mean, is your experience anywhere in there?
Yeah, I'm trying to put, that's so insightful. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around once I've said I'm sorry, it's or love is, you never, who said that's crazy? Love means you never have to say you're sorry. But Yeah,
But that's it's problematic. Now this is why when I was in seminary, I went through counseling. I was just having some issues, and my issue was this: that I had a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was, disciplining them for things like spilling milk. Well, that's what 1 and 2-year-olds do, and I realized, wait a minute, something's not right in me. So I had Fred Van Tatenhove, I did some counseling with him. And I told him, hey, I go back later and I apologize. And this is what he said to me. He looked me square in the eye. He said, your apology means nothing if you don't change your behavior.
Wow.
Yeah. I that's something similar to that is I learned the difference at a point in my life between an apology and an excuse. An excuse is saying, I'm sorry, and I'm going to give you the reasons why it happened the particular way it did, which in some sense absolves me. I'm sorry it happened, but it really wasn't my fault.
Right.
It was my parents. An apology is saying, I messed up. I did the wrong thing, and by God's help, I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time calling it apologies when we're really giving excuses. Students show up in my class, and I didn't do the paper last night, but that was because I was praying. And I want an apology from them. I don't want
I just late last week, I had this just really intense moment of kind of introspection because there was something that had happened, and not my reaction to it, but the thought that came to my mind, I knew was not a good, healthy thought, and I tried to capture that thought. And it hit me in that moment that the thought I was having right then was the same kind of thought I had as a young Christian. And so I started asking myself, I literally for about 2 hours, I doubted my salvation. I'm an ordained, but because I was thinking, I haven't changed at all. In 20-something years being a Christian, I haven't changed at all. I'm still thinking the same way. And so I go back, this whole conversation of holiness, back to that transformation, the renewing of our minds, and that was, I spent several hours, just confess. I was sorry for that. God, how is my mind not been renewed? And so this whole deal, I think we've got to get back to our roots of what not just Wesley talked about, but what Jesus wanted, that we need to look at the inside of the cup, which means our minds and our attitudes and our motives.
And Heath, if there's any place in my life where I, as a historian, I balance Luther's idea that God is not always concerned about what my performance was. He wants to know, do you have faith in the cross?
Yes.
With Wesley's side that says, let's move forward and get off dead center.
Right.
There's been enough times in my life where, like you, I have failed spiritually, and in a holiness tradition where if you lose your sanctification, you could lose your salvation in the process.
Yeah.
I need to discover that. Pick yourself up, look to the cross, ask for forgiveness, but not turn it too quickly into a Wesley. We're always sinners, always asking God. A Luther's. We're always asking God for forgiveness.
All right, so let me tie in a thing out of the chat room with just something that's striking me now with this idea that our current generation, and that probably includes me, are more intense and less deep. Your brother Tim's in the chat room, and he says he thinks that this generation is also more service-oriented. Do you think that is our way of dealing with guilt? Is that if we're intense about something, if we're pouring ourselves and investing ourselves into something, doing, it's a way of taking the mind off of those things and somehow coming to a performance-oriented salvation, saying, okay, we're good now. We've done the deed that we needed to do. We've served our time. Even if I don't know whether or not we verbalize it that way, but I wonder if that's the mind behind it.
Yeah, see, Matthew, that's going back to where we started with the Roman Catholic idea of being Mother Teresa. The ultimate sainthood is some kind of self-sacrifice for the poor and needy. And God knows that I affirm everything we're doing in that area. But Wesley wanted to get the goal of sainthood, but he wanted the process to be through faith in the work of Jesus Christ on the cross.
Yeah.
not some weighing my bad against how many times
Right.
I've Habitat for
Yeah.
Humanity.
Right. And when we do that, that makes the mind focus on things like guilt, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So, but let me. Okay, so now let me go back here to say that for my generation and older, we had a tendency that I'm saved, I'm sanctified, and I'm petrified, and I'm on my way to glory. And I could argue that we removed ourselves from the public arena in ways that were detrimental. And so, Bud, you know our history. And so, in 1843, we are there on issues of race. I mean, and Luther Lee is so radical. My belief is we don't know in the Wesleyan Church how radical he was. And then you take that and Bud, you know some of the research I've been doing. You contrast that with the civil rights movement. And those were good. I mean, I lived here in South Carolina. Good holiness people, loved God, but they were just wrong on segregation. And part of the reason that they were wrong is that they had removed. There was no service. Let me put it that way. There was no service.
Tony, there was, but it was foreign missions. We didn't do anything close to home.
Right.
We sent people to Africa because those people didn't know the gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
That was all of our social concern was
Yes.
a part of the world.
Yeah.
Not our neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, we're going everywhere here. I want to kind of back up. One of the questions we wanted to ask you is, what ways do you think that Wesley might be underappreciated, overstated, or that is simply not known in the Wesleyan Church about Wesley?
Well, I think that we've tied so much to the sanctification side that we've lost the fact that Wesley was passionate about salvation of the whole person. If we could stop like you just said, saved, sanctified language. Wesley says salvation is what God starts in our lives the first time we have conviction, and it goes all of the way through. And making it a two-stage rocket or whatever we've done doesn't. So we've got to appreciate the fact. In my research, I went through the journals. Wesley preached his sermon on justification by faith 3 times as much as he preached any sermon on sanctification or perfection. Wesley wanted to redeem people. He was not focused on some doctrine that was unique to the Wesleyans, like entire sanctification. And any place we're reaching out to work with Baptists or Pentecostals to redeem people, that's Wesley. We've got the idea that you have to live the transformed life. And that's our contribution. But our biggest contribution is that we are an evangelical church. And if we could just hammer that home to people, that Wesley was not a legalist, entire sanctification person. Right. He was passionate about reaching people with the gospel.
Yeah. All right, let's shift gears here. I understand that last fall, you and your wife, Carol, spent 3 months in Zambia, Africa, with IWU nursing students. And while you were there, you taught a course on the history of Christianity in Africa, which was incredibly insightful. So how so? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Oh, to discover that in biblical times, I'm just going to throw some quickies at us.
Sure.
Nobody had been up in a space satellite. Africa in the time of Jesus is just about Egypt and in fact, the maps at that particular time, Jesus was actually born in Africa from the Roman Empire in Italy. Africa was the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and a little bit of the top of Africa.
Wow.
So Jesus, you could argue Jesus was an African. And then there was this church, it still exists. It's called the Coptic Church, which didn't agree when some of those early councils happened. They got into a snit over some little issue. And so the Coptic Church broke away. There's a church in Egypt, and there's another church in Ethiopia that go back 2,000 years. We talk about Wesleyans in 1843 as if that's ancient history. There's African churches that go way back.
Right.
Wow.
And then the thriving church, St. Augustine, all of these great church leaders that I teach about that lived in Northern Africa, Islam comes through and they just obliterate it, Tony. It's gone. And then you have to wait until the 1850s when Protestant missionaries start coming in to Sierra Leone, into Zambia, the British Empire countries. But that's the story of some of the things that I learned. I learned this terrible wedding of colonial empires that were absolutely raping these countries of their minerals and of their people, the slave trade, and at the same time how the missionaries kind of came along. I wish we could have cleaned that up a little more, much as you talk about issues in the civil rights movement. It's not a pretty picture of missionaries not standing up where they needed to. Some did.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what's most interesting, and I can do it. I walk 3 miles into off the road, out a path, there's no road, to this Wesleyan church. And out here, I could have easily worn shorts and a t-shirt and been very comfortable. But I was told not to do that because when we got out there, everybody's got dark sports coats, white shirts, and neckties on in Africa. And I come to a church here in Fairmount, Indiana, and the pastor's up there in he's up there in a shirt with a shirt tail out and wearing jeans. That disconnect was incredible. And then they started singing. They sang it in the Tonga language of Zambia, but they're singing, "We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll. There isn't any water within 200." They don't know what an anchor is. I don't think they've ever seen billows.
Yeah.
This amazing importing of America in the 1950s. It's what I grew up with.
Wow.
I grew up in a small church, and what I saw on that Sunday morning was a 1950s Wesleyan Methodist church in New York.
Oh, wow. So, like, for you, it's stepping back into time, wasn't it?
It was a time warp. And I would rather that it was just pure African. Then after they'd sang "We Have an Anchor," they did their Tonga songs. And they started that shuffle. Have you ever been over there to see how Africans move when they sing and the drums? And I'm saying, this is what Africa should do.
Yeah.
You talk about, the whole issue I'm talking about is how do you take the core of the gospel and bring it in to a place like that? Yeah. The image that I leave with is we came back through that 3 mile walk. I saw a woman kneeling in front of a little fire pot, three stones in a fire. She was making some kind of food and she's got a cell phone in her hand. So Africa is a mixed up mess of singing "We Have an Anchor" and cell phone. You talk about technology. You guys are on the track of something. Bring technology and the gospel all together in Africa.
Oh, wow.
Is there any other projects or anything you're working on right now that you want to talk about? I know you kind of mentioned to us the John Wesley letters you're working with.
Thanks to John Maxwell a few years ago, he had some context for us. Indiana Wesleyan was able to purchase 2 of John Wesley's letters.
Wow.
They've been sitting up in a glass case. Somebody needs to figure out what those letters are all about. Then you may be aware that Indiana Wesleyan has had some close connections with Hobby Lobby. And they also have letters. They have purchased a set of letters. So my job for the next few months, maybe years, Keith, is to research John Wesley letters, which is interesting because he didn't know he was writing anything. This is like you guys sending an email. And 300 years from now, somebody's going to get one of your silly emails, Keith, and try to make something very significant out of what you said to Tony.
Right.
That would be foolish.
Yeah, that would be very foolish.
There'd be very few emails that we'd really want to keep out of the whole set. I haven't discussed. I think one of the letters we have is, I can't go into all the details of it with the time, but we have one letter that I think is very significant, that we were fortunate. We didn't know it was significant at the time we got it. It plays a very key role in Wesley's life. So once I figure out a little more, maybe I can come back on and talk to you about it.
Yes, you need to break that story on the Technology Show, bud.
That's right, yes.
Hey, listen, it has been an absolute delight to have you on the show today.
Absolutely.
Well, it's nice to connect up with you guys and the wonderful ministry you have. You are more than just spending some chat time. You are helping Wesleyans to think theologically, and I affirm you for it, Tony, Heath, Matthew.
Well, thank you. And again, one of the things we say to our guest is that we understand that time itself is a gift, and you've given us a huge gift. And this has been so much fun. We will do this again. And seriously, keep me informed on how this thing with the Wesley letters, that might just make for just a great show.
Okay, we'll do it.
All right, Lord bless. We'll see you.
Onions.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye. Tell you what we're going to do here. We went long on that, but we already determined that we'd go long because he had the time. We're just going to skip download of the week, and let's zoom to They Said It.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
Children in foster care have had the one thing they should be able to count on fall apart, and that is their family. When you look at the sheer number of followers of Jesus, the number of congregations out there, it is very possible for a family to be waiting for every single child out there in foster care. But right now, what we have are children waiting for families. Pastor Robert Galinis of Denver's Colorado Community Church, who wanted to give children in foster care a better life, and who in 2007 started Project 127, a faith-based organization that encourages Christian parents to adopt. Source Charisma.
We were disappointed. We put on a vigorous defense. We think it went well for us in the courtroom, but the jury spoke, and we respect the jury's verdict. Jack McMahon, defense attorney for Dr. Kermit. Wow, I'm just word salad here. Defense attorney for Dr. Kemet Gosnell, Philadelphia abortion provider, who was found guilty and convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder. Source CNN.
God has laid it on my heart to plant a seed of $2.5 million into your ministry.
Yes.
But God only wants me to make this gift if all the ministry partners match their mouth within 90 days.
Yes.
I feel so strongly that He wants them to be a part of the supernatural wealth transfer that is coming to every believer who will obey God's word. An unnamed man who Benny Hinn calls a longtime beloved friend who is interested in helping the televangelist get his ministry out of debt. Source, The Christian Post.
But gluttony has never been merely an addiction to food. And if we look at it in its original definition and context, gluttony becomes far closer to home than we'd like to admit. At its simplest, gluttony is the soul's addiction to excess. Jason Todd, in an article he has entitled The Socially Acceptable Sin. Source, Relevant Magazine.
Gluttony has it a lot closer to home. Would you just reach over again to your left and grab that and slide it over into the frame?
Kind of ironic that right in the middle of that is a Heath bar.
A bouquet of candy bars.
Yeah, so let me read that again. So gluttony, it's way closer to home than what you think. I should do it like this. Yes. Gluttony is way closer to home.
Listen, don't be dropping the candy.
All right, so let's. We don't have a lot of time here. So let's. I want to go to the one that you read. I know I was playing off it and everything. The second one, the Benny Hinn.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not here to crucify Benny Hinn, shoot him down. But when you sent me this story, it was just the same old, same old. You want to know what kills the church? Right. In the public arena of things, it's this kind of stuff.
Well, we've I don't know if I can't remember if we talked about the story of Benny Hill's Benny.
Get the music for us. Get the music.
Benny Hinn's divorce a couple of years ago. We studied,
he remarried his wife, didn't he?
I don't know.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Okay. Well, and then, we talked about the Crystal Cathedral going bankrupt. And here's a guy who you're flying around in a jet, but you're in debt. I'm like, so, and that's the whole thing is how much in debt is he? This guy's offering $2.5 million. If everybody matches this, that's $5 million. How are you $5 million in debt? I mean, People are sending you money.
Also, Benny Hinn says this is an unnamed man who's putting up $2.5 million.
Right.
Well, does he have a name? And he probably ought to come forward because $2.5 million is a lot of money. And so even if this is the truth, so I will assume that you have a guy putting up that kind of money. How do I know that?
Right.
And so all you do is fuel your critics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the church, again, is on a broad scale is made to look like it's a money-hungry, institution spending, like a drunken sailor.
And like in the quote, this guy, unnamed guy, he wants people to be a part of a supernatural wealth transfer. Well, what,
That's what we want our viewers to do. Be part of a supernatural wealth transfer to the
but
technology.
I'm just saying, okay. Let me just talk this out. You have a guy, Benny Hinn.
Make it quick.
He preaches about money all the time, but yet his ministry's in debt. So in a sense, he has not practiced what he preached.
Yeah, and some of the things they encourage you to do. So it wasn't Benny Hinn, but you talked about one of these faith-based, faith and healing, and he was encouraging people, even if you don't have the money, put it on your credit card.
Yeah, he said God wants some of you to put your gift on a credit card, and because God's going to give you a supernatural debt forgiveness.
Yeah. A great story, the very first story you read out of Charisma magazine. We encourage you to read that full story. It's a wonderful story of how churches in Colorado are really becoming a strong presence in the adoption foster care in that state, and they're beginning to make a difference.
I don't know if it was this church in particular, but I was listening to Exponential podcast from 2012, and there was a pastor there. It is a church in Denver or in Colorado, and their church was just like, all right, how do we impact our community? Yeah. And so they start working with the foster care people, and actually got to a point where at one time there were no children in their county on a waiting list for families.
Well, in this story, there's one spokesman for this whole issue in a particular county, and they just talk about what an impact the church has had there. And this is a topic of discussion that we've had. As a matter of fact, we have made an appeal to the Bear Foundation. And I think that interview is going to happen with the president of the Bear Foundation, where they talk about this and churches getting involved in this issue. I was curious yesterday to see who all was covering the Dr. Kermit Gosnell. And I will say this. I mean, we were critical of all the news agencies. They seem to be ignoring this story.
Yes.
When it broke yesterday, I went to every one, and with the exception of NBC, all the major networks had it as their top story, did a good job covering it. I had highlighted some things out of each news agency covered it different, but you can't read this story without your stomach turning.
I was following Twitter yesterday, and I can't remember if it was Planned Parenthood, another one of those pro-abortion organizations, and they were essentially they were fit to be. They didn't know really how to react to this, and one of them put out a tweet essentially saying things like that happen because of the pro-life movement. Because of the pro-life movement, that's what people have to resort to.
Yeah, one of the stories that I was going to read from today had exactly that. Well, the problem is that there should be absolutely no unfettered. Another news agency said that this highlights the problem among the poor, and my response to that is when you pass that, when you legalized abortion in this country, the argument was that you were doing it for the sake of the poor.
Yeah.
And so are you telling me that they're not in an any better position on this issue than they were during after Roe v. Wade?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I saw some statistics that half of women who have to get who choose to get an abortion have to get financial help for it. So it goes back to what you just said, that obviously that hasn't worked. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
It's just bottom line is this is a sickening story that was.
And if you have a hard time coming out against what he did, then you need to search really deep, and you don't understand the depths of the depravity of what's happened here.
What people don't understand too is these these 3 counts of first-degree murder, if he performs those procedures an hour earlier, he's not guilty of anything by the law of the land. If he does this to the babies while they're still in the womb, he's not guilty of anything. And that to me is the most mind-boggling point of all this.
I'd like to research that a little bit because I'm not sure that you're quite right at that late of a term. Usually it's like there's this thing like a first trimester, and I don't know what the law is in the state, but I hesitate to agree with you. I think that you may be wrong.
If these 3 were after the 24 weeks, if it's after 24 weeks, you're not supposed to do any sort of. So you would be right on that.
Let's just be careful in the way that we word that. It still would have been wrong for him to do.
Right.
I believe. I think these were late term, but I could be wrong.
Right.
Another thing that just scares me in the community of believers, like everybody is just so ready to crucify this guy, and he did. It's right to pursue justice. It is absolutely right to pursue justice in this case, but not to sound like the ultra, like.
Are you saying you don't want a mob with
exactly? It's not right for us to band together in some sort of. Awful thing. It is right to pursue justice. It is right to say this is a horrible story. It is right to say this guy committed some atrocities, but it's also right for us to go to the Lord in prayer and pray mercy over this man and others.
A part of the response from the conservative Christian community has to do with the fact that the first time that he was reported was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was just ignored. And a lot of people feel like it's because he was specifically in an area that was very favorable towards abortion. So we're not going to do, we're not going to do anything negative towards abortion.
In the decade after Roe versus Wade passed, he was a hero amongst the pro-choice movement. And, one of the most startling statements that came out, yesterday after the verdict, and again, I think it was someone from Planned Parenthood who basically, and this is not the first time one of their reps have said this, but basically said that these babies that are out of the womb, that the decision should still be up to the doctor and the mother what happens to, I'm talking about a baby alive out of the womb in the room, that there is this belief, well, the mother and the doctor should be able to decide what happens to that. And
that's been a point of controversy as well, especially among conservative Christians, and rightfully so.
Right.
Rightfully so. Real quick, we're not going to be able to do it justice. I thought the story on gluttony in Relevant magazine, dead on, and this is something that I have said for years, that when we reduce gluttony to simply overeating, we misunderstand. Look at gluttony. Every time it's used in the scriptures, it is in the context of something broader than just eating. And this article nails it. I mean, it's dead on. I think that this Jason Todd crawled in my mind and wrote the article.
So what you're saying is that when I sit down and on Netflix, I power through an entire season of Lost.
Gluttony.
I love it.
I will determine for other people what is gluttony.
Season 4 of Arrested Development's about to come out. All the episodes at the same time. And what you're saying, you're putting a little conviction on my heart there.
All right. Hey, listen, next week we will have a pre-recorded interview with Dr. Rosaria Butterfield.
Yeah.
She was a delight just to talk with.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome.
We didn't have the best connection of what we would have desired.
And we're still working the kinks out of the system. I have not actually gone back and checked that recording yet. So I'll be doing that after here. Be sure everything was okay. That would be a disaster.
For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, she's the author of The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. She lived a lesbian lifestyle for many years, had a monogamous partner. And it's really the story of one pastor, Pastor Ken, and in the midst of hate mail and things that she got from conservative Christians, his was a loving letter of response, invited her into his home, which started a 2-year journey for her, and just her life's done a 180, and she talks about that. She was at Syracuse University. She was in the English department in charge of feminist studies and was really had a significant place at the university there. She calls her conversion a train wreck, and as you hear the interview,
but a great interview.
You understand well. Yeah, just a delightful person. Also coming up June the 11th, we'll have Luke Gilkerson here. He is with CovenantEyes.com and has a blog, Breaking Free. Also, Dave and Donna Tolan will be in studio on June the 25th. And all three of us know Dave and Donna, just wonderful people. And looking forward to having them. And then mark your calendars, July the 9th, there will be no show. The three of us will be up at Table Rock Kids Camp. We're all three being counselors this year.
That's right.
Wow. And so we will need counseling, perhaps, following.
And if you live in the South Carolina district and you are a Wesleyan,
there you go.
I would love to tap you to be a counselor at camp. We need more adults.
What we're doing is a week of brainwashing, making Technology Show fans.
Brilliant.
All right.
Now, but I have it on the highest authority that on that week, the Earth will continue to rotate on its axis. The sun will rise, and
we've got medication that we'll give to our listeners. If okay,
Yep.
Heath, where can our listeners find you on the internet?
I'm Heath Mulligan everywhere, at Heath Mulligan on Twitter, Facebook, HeathMulligan.com.
And I'm Matthew TG, MatthewTG.com for me. Tony?
AKC64 at Facebook and at Twitter. And if you want to do further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com, or better yet, call us at 3049-TEOLOGY. That's 304-986-5649. Leave us a message. We may even play those comments.
Right. It's just a answering machine. You don't have to be scared. None of us are going to pick it up. You can you used to call into a show. You used to write down your comments about what you thought, and call in. It's just voicemail, and we'll get that as a little MP3 file.
And that's what we want. I mean, just people reacting. If you could try to keep your comments to 30 seconds, no more than a minute, because if it starts running long, then that affects us. But as Matthew said, there's some tech shows that I've watched, and I've actually called in just to give my opinion, to say, well, I think you're right on this or you're wrong on that, and we would welcome that. Yeah. As always, thanks for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Adios.
Oh, yeah. Ha ha ha.